It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. What's up? What's happening? I'm Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulsen. And with us all episode long. Well, he is always all episode long, but on camera, on mic all episode long, our producer, Nick Berlansky, because it is a Mailbag Monday. We are going heavy on the mailbag questions. We will do our OTA recap later this week. But, Nick, you fetched a couple of questions out of my Twitter mentions, and let's dive right in, shall we?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to eat my Cheetos like I normally do while watching you guys do the show. But I guess this is also a good alternative. It's nice to actually come out and talk to you guys. But let's start with.
Sorry to ruin your dietary plans.
I know, honestly, I got to stay on a schedule here. Come on, guys. But as Mike asked on Twitter, many reports about how from minicamp is that he had some good and some bad. But does the overall QB room look better than it has in years?
I think yes. I'll just go to let's see, Logan, between the two of us, we have it going all the way back to whatever year you were drafted, 2010, 2011?
Yeah, 2010, yeah.
So, because when I got here, that's when you left. Sorry about that. That was totally my fault. Going back to when Cousins and Colt were here, I would say that's probably the best it's been in my era. And a lot of that obviously had to do with Kirk, because he's the best quarterback that's been here during this era. And I think Sam could be as good as Kirk. We'll see. Obviously, Kirk's had a very long, successful career. He's never been a top 5 quarterback, but he's been kind of between 10 and 15 probably. And then it spurts even higher than that for the majority of the last 8 years. And I think Colt was seen as a very, very solid backup. So I would say Jacoby's definitely stronger than Colt was as a backup. And then it comes down to what's the difference between Howell and Kirk. And we're obviously not going to know till the middle of the season.
Yeah, I think the other one would be like Alex Smith before he got hurt, because I think also Colt was the backup then as well, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Yep.
So that's another interesting room. And obviously the injury there taints it. I think the thing with Sam, and I've been very bullish on Sam through the OTA process. Even the bad days, I've kind of been able to explain away some of that. And I think rightfully so. I think he's had a good OTA period. I think the thing with Sam that makes me kind of back off of like comparing him directly to Kirk or Alex or even Robert when Robert was rolling in 2012 is that he hasn't really done anything yet, and I think that's an unfair comparison. So like as much as like we're optimistic about it, like I don't think you can compare this quarterback room to those quarterback rooms because there's no like body of work to support it yet. And I think we're excited about the upside. Sam's obviously very, very talented. The release, the mobility, kind of this, like modern model of what it is to be a quarterback in the NFL. Live arm, big arm, mobility, escapability, kind of off schedule ability. But he hasn't done it for a long period of time. Like I went back recently, last week actually, and watched, the Dallas game again from, his last start. And just he wasn't asked to do that much. And you saw the flash, you saw the ability, but it's just not there yet. So in terms of saying, how does this compare to the best quarterback rooms of the last 15 or 17 years? I'm like, let's just pump the brakes a little bit on that because he has to show me. Obviously, I'm really high on Jacoby Brissett. Last year in Cleveland was excellent. I think there's a reason that he's kind of like the best backup in the NFL and never the starter, and I think that has to be considered, but I'm very high on him. I just think I need more information to kind of say, hey, this stacks up with those other rooms that you mentioned, because those guys like Kirk, what was that? You were here in 2015. Like he had played a little bit. He was looking for that next contract. He had stuff under his belt. And to me, that's really valuable as a former player, as an evaluator. Like I need to see you do it for an extended period of time before I give you kind of any anointed ability there.
I know that felt like pushback on what I was saying, but it's not. Mine was more of a reflection of how bad the rooms have been. Like, it's just like, Jacoby Brissett himself is better than most of the rooms that they've had.
Which is crazy,
Alex 2018 is an interesting one because they won 6 of 8 before that Houston game where he gets hurt, but he wasn't good. He was averaging like 100. High hundreds yards per game, like not even 200 yards per game, but they just kept winning. But like, that's Alex Smith. He always just knew how to manage the game. And that's something that separates him from Jacoby. Like statistically, Jacoby might be better, but Alex just knew what was needed and made the key plays at the right time and was never afraid to audible into a run play. And, that kept his
Right.
stats down. Like there's just little quarterbacking professional stuff that Alex did that you just went like, wow, I get it. I get how this dude, everyone always wants to replace him, but he just wins. And obviously the injury then changes all of that. But I think even just Brissett and what he is and what he's done is better than anything they've had for Rivera, probably. Like
Yeah.
Fitzpatrick, what we thought he could be was like kind of on this level.
Right.
Because he was coming off a heck of a year in Miami, and then he gets hurt, what is it, 15 plays into the season.
Yeah.
And that's the end of his career. Obviously Taylor's played well, but I think both agree that Brissett's better than Heineke.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, and I think it's just they haven't had very good rooms. They've been trying to solve the quarterback position in Washington since Joe Theismann broke his leg. Like, not to be glib about it, but like that's what we're talking about here. They've obviously had very good players for single seasons along the lines, and over time they won 3 Super Bowls with 3 different quarterbacks. But like that is both amazing and also emblematic of what quarterback has been here. Even when they have been good, they haven't had a definitive answer. And I think that is why they so desperately want someone like Howell to work out, because then you have a couple of years here, which, again, Cousins is the only guy that's done this, where you have like 3 years in a row of the same starter. It hasn't happened. Jason Campbell had a couple of years, Brunell had a couple of years, but there's never been, especially a younger guy who you're like, yep, this is the guy. Campbell was probably the closest of the last like 20 years. And then it was Kirk, and, that never felt solid because of the contract stuff. So, if they can get Howell to be good, that would be amazing. But even with Brissett, you're still looking at one of probably the best room that Rivera's had just by his presence alone.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, Brissett is awesome. I totally agree. And, it really, like you said, there's a lot of excitement, and I think there's like rightfully around Sam Howell and what he can be. But, I need to see it. I'm excited what he can be in this Eric Bieniemy offense. But yeah, I do think with Ron and just having Brissett here, he's probably, the most talented quarterback that they've had, which is mind blowing because top 15 quarterback last year. And I think that's exciting. So,
in fairness to anyone who's screaming at their whatever screen they're watching this on right now, or their phone listening to it, like that assumes Brissett is exactly what he was last year, which is one of his best years. So like if Brissett is backup Brissett, who's actually not a top 15 quarterback in the league, then this looks very silly in 6 months. So hopefully we don't find out, because Sam's playing great, but like that's at least worth mentioning in the name of objectivity and fairness.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. I mean, if you disagree, definitely leave a comment and like why you disagree. Because to me, like when I just step back and look at it, I think the depth is a little bit of a question because Sam hasn't done a whole bunch. But in terms of play, it's hard to argue with. It's hard to argue with a guy who's led starting campaigns, and like again, he's the best backup in the league for a reason. But I do think that that's something that it's an important variable, especially over the last 4 years since I've been covering the team. Like. It's hard for me to say one of those guys that played was better than him. So yeah, but in terms of going back to Kirk, I think Kirk is better, obviously. But like this is a unique situation in terms of upside. We just need to see it actualized.
For sure. All right, Nick. Next one.
Another question on Twitter from Julio Iglesias says, the way the secondary is shaping up, do you see a scenario where Kam Curl doesn't get paid in Washington?
Ooh.
That's interesting because they have so much talent back there. They draft Quan Martin, which kind of is Kam Curl insurance. Plays in the post, plays Buffalo. But I do think that, like, if Cam performs, Ron is in charge, right? Because this is the other variable, too, is like, okay, well, what happens if they're not a good football team? Everybody gets blown out, new ownership. Do they just be like, all right, thanks, buddy. Go have fun, sign somewhere for lots of money. And whatever new defensive coordinator comes in doesn't have the value on Kam Curl that this defense does. I guess I could say, like, yes, I see a scenario, but I do think that especially if they're good enough that Ron stays around, they've proven they will pay their own if they perform. And I fully expect Kam Curl to perform. So scenario, yes. Likelihood, not high, I guess is how I'd answer that, Logan.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's definitely possible they don't pay him. And has he come out and said that he's unhappy or working for an extension? Is that why he didn't he didn't participate in the team stuff of OTAs, or is that just kind of
He has not said it. He kind of refuses to say it, but
right?
I think it's largely understood that that is kind of where he's at.
Sure.
Like I
So
think he understands that he can't get one right now, and it's one of those where it's like, hey man, I'm not going to go out there and get hurt or do something silly. I'll be around. I'll make sure that I'm ready for the season, but like, I'll see y'all in training camp.
yeah, and I guess the thing I would say is that I don't until we know like what he's asking for, which I'm assuming is top safety money. I would assume.
Mhm.
If I'm a GM, and I'm trying to rebut that claim, I would say, Cam, like you have not performed by any kind of major metric like a top five safety. Like we all know because we watch this team every single week that he's a good football player, that he's a good communicator, that he can play multiple different positions, and his value here is extremely high. In terms of the league, I don't know what his value is. And it would seem to me that he'd be one of those guys that would be classically undervalued, like going somewhere else. Like Bates just signed that big deal in Atlanta. And I think that would
Mhm.
probably be the benchmark. And I don't remember exactly what the numbers were. It was 44 or something like that. But basically what I'm saying is I don't think the league looks at him and says, oh, here is like a Reed or a Dawkins or any of these like really dominant safeties that we've seen. And obviously he kind of is a reflection of how the position has changed. He's, a really good tackler, not a big hitter, got a lot of position flexibility, linebacker, nickel, Buffalo nickel, excuse me, and post safety, which is great. But I kind of say to myself, like, has he had the production? Has he had like those gaudy stats that get those guys those big contracts? And I don't know that he has. And again, if I'm the GM here, because after having seen him, I want him on my football team, and I'm gonna do a lot to make that happen. But I'm not sure he deserves to be, top five highest paid safety in the NFL.
So obviously PFF is what it is, but he was a second rated safety
In
in
terms
PFF
of
last year.
grade. In terms of
Yeah.
grade, and I agree with that. And like when you look at his play, it's very, very high. But I don't think I if GMs were giving contracts based on PFF, I think the league would look very, very different, right?
Right.
I think like for example, like Derwin James is considered the best safety in the NFL, and there is a lot of comparisons between the game, the position flex, but Derwin James has like this explosive element to his game that has characterized good safeties throughout the league for a long time. So I know he's the highest graded player or second highest graded player at PFF in terms of safety. I just don't think that that's how people value safeties. Like they here when in safety evaluation, they value the length, they value the ability to match up with the tight end, and I don't know if that metric is kind of a league-wide metric in terms of evaluation. And the position flex, I don't know if that's a league-wide metric in terms of value. So that would be my one pushback on paying him is that like if you let him hit the open market, does he get like hey, here's a 4-year, $35 million deal, and then you're like, hey, yeah, we'll match that, kind of like what they did with Lamar in Baltimore. Like they didn't have a precedent for the deal, the template for the deal. He hits the market, or he doesn't hit the market, but Jalen Hurts signs his contract. It's like, okay, that's the new standard. That's the new market. Here we
Right.
go. And I think like that is something I could see happening potentially here is that, their value of him here is not reflected by the league. So when he goes out into the market, they get a nice number that they feel good about. They match it. They plus it, whatever they want to do, and get him back.
Yeah. The problem with that is they Lamar was a restricted free agent,
Correct.
right? So obviously, if he goes out to the market and another team gives him a deal and they're like, all right, we'll match it, he could just sign the other deal.
He can, but
So,
I do think you can sweeten the pot. Like you've been in maybe you haven't, but like when I was not a very good football player, but I'd get in these situations. Like when I signed in Atlanta, Detroit was also interested. So Detroit put a contract down on the table and said, "We'd like you to come here." And when I went on my visit to Atlanta, they basically said, "Well, we want you more than that, so we'll give you this." And there was a little bit of a bidding war, and we're talking like $5,000. You know what I mean? It wasn't like millions and millions of dollars, but that happens at a
Nick and I
larger
here from Radio Moneyland are like
right,
$5,000. That's
right,
incredible.
right. But I'm saying it was like we go up, here we go up here, and then it was like eventually one of the parties was like, well, we're not going to go up anymore, take it or leave it. And I was like, I'll take it because this is way better than what they offered. So I think if I'm his agent, I'm going to tell the Commanders, I know how valuable he is to you. This is the deal. Match it, plus it, whatever Cam wants out of it, and then let's make that happen. And I'm getting my client more money, basically.
Yeah, totally. And obviously we'll see if it gets to that or if there's an
Sure.
extension. You know, I think they would like to get him done. Obviously they want to get him done at their number, but they can't right now because of the ownership situation. So once that clears here in a couple weeks, hopefully it's one of those where they show up at training camp, they sit down over dinner after the first night of practice and get that done. But we'll see.
Sure.
But back to the original question, like, is there a chance he doesn't sign here? Yes. If he wants top 5 safety money and they're like, no, that's one scenario. And then I think if Percy Butler, Derek Forrest, and Quan Martin ball out, and Jeremy Reeves proves that he's continuously getting better on defense, not just as a special teams ace, then their leverage goes up in that regard. It's like, hey man, like we'll pay you this, but we have good players. So
sure.
What do you want? I still think they much prefer to just sign him though. So that would, again, there's the scenario, but consider it unlikely.
No, I agree. Yeah, it just depends on where they're at. And we have no idea about the contract right now or what he's asking or what he's thinking. So good job by his camp of keeping that pretty close to the vest. But, maybe they're miles apart in terms of value.
It's possible.
And that's when he would leave, probably.
For sure. Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. I'm Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulson. The next voice you hear, our producer, Nick Verlansky, with our next mailbag question.
On Twitter, Strictly Speaking asked, with the rumor the Steelers are in on trading for Chase Young, what would the return need to be to not feel like we completely failed with him and gave up for almost nothing?
I love this question because it's such an interesting hypothetical. I don't know anything about the Steelers rumor, so we'll just kind of ignore that part of the question, Logan. But like, what's the Chase Young trade that you say yes to right now? Because there's philosophically, like, do you cut your losses? Are you selling low? There's like a lot of kind of game theory, stock asset management type of thought that goes into this. And then there's just like what you think of the football player. And obviously we've now seen Chase have a pretty good mini camp. So is there a deal that you would say yes to at this point? And the last, kind of factor I'll throw into this is, of course, he and Montez are both up at the end of the year. And there's kind of a logistics of salary cap and getting people done and how you build your roster that goes with all of this as well.
I mean, obviously there's a deal that I'm like, oh yeah. Like if someone says, oh, we'll give you a first round pick, I don't even think twice about it. Yes.
So
boom.
Just straight up one for Chase Young, done.
Get out of here. Absolutely.
Okay.
So that's one. And then even if they gave me a second, I would think about it. But I think it's important for people to understand, like, he has not, like, just because he had one good minicamp practice, teams are not going to negate what he's done the last 3 years here. They're not going to be like, oh, wow, minicamp looked good. All right. Well, he has that crazy injury history. And he hasn't played good since his rookie, like really, really at a high level. And there's injury. There's a whole bunch of stuff affecting that. But he hasn't played really good since his rookie year. So to me, I'm like, if I'm a GM and I'm looking at Chase, the most I'm going to give is a third-round pick. The most I would give is a third-round pick because the risk associated with it, right? And if I'm the Commanders, I'm like, absolutely not. Because if Chase, a motivated Chase, is ready to go, he's going to play better than a third-round pick. And if he plays really well and we can't re-sign him, we're going to get a third-round comp. So it's like, why would I do anything unless it's a crazy price deal to get him out of here, is my thought.
That is 100% where I'm at, is if you want to give me something that is worth what he would be worth if he was good, we can talk. And that has a lot to do with roster construction of like, okay, well now I know my focus is going to be on re-signing Montez Sweat. I don't have this like year-long, who am I signing, whatever. It's like, we're going to franchise Montez and then we're going to pay him a bunch of money next year, assuming that he has another very solid year. I know what Chase has been the last couple of years, and he has been so frustrating in so many ways, from his play to the OTAs or not showing up and, some of his comments around some of that stuff, whatever. But his potential is just still so high, and he's still so young that I just find it hard to give up on that. And I know some fans are ready to push him out the door. Others are like Team Chase forever and can't believe we're even having this discussion. but realistically, somewhere in the middle is this reality that his upside is extremely high. His current value is low. Selling low is bad. Buying low is good. And the Commanders are the seller. So if I'm another team, I might if I'm the Steelers, I might mess around with that second round pick. Maybe not if I'm the Steelers because I've already got Watt and whatever. But if I'm another team and I think Chase can still be Chase, like what we thought Chase would be coming out of Ohio State, like would I give up a second rounder for the guy who went second overall? Yeah, I probably would do that. And that's why if I'm the Commanders, I'm like, I don't know, like a second rounder, is that enough for me for the guy that I still think can be really good and can, by the way, this year in a must-win year, if I'm Ron Rivera, and by the way, we always talk about it with Rivera, but like if I'm Mayhew, like I'm not exactly looking to make trades that are making me worse this year. I want to he's on the line. His job is on the line too. Maybe even more than Rivera's in some ways. Cause a lot of people think that, I know there's a question about this later, but like a lot of people think Ron might be pushing to get into a GM, more of a GM role. So there's just like Chase being great or even being really good makes this defense potentially great this year.
Right.
And so if I'm the Commanders, I probably just hold on for the ride and think of it less in terms of asset management and think about it more of what makes my football team good right now. And Chase Young being a productive football player is the best thing for my football team right now. So I'd probably just do that.
Absolutely. And again, if something crazy happens, like if someone's like, I'll give you a first and a fifth, I'm like, cool. Yeah,
Done.
let's make that happen.
Yeah.
Make it right now.
Yeah.
Don't even think twice about it. But I don't think whatever the Steelers are considering offering for him is definitely not in that kind of area, right?
Sure.
It's like maybe a second, maybe. And that I would consider. I would consider a second round pick. It just depends on where I think Chase is at. Mentally, and I don't talk to Chase, like the way Ron does. Obviously, he's around the building. Chase is an awesome guy to talk to, but like they have a better understanding of where he's at in terms of meetings and his mindset.
Sure.
But you're always, especially now, like you're going to get a comp pick for him if he does walk, if he's good, and if he's good, that means you're doing really good. You've got a top 5 defense,
Right.
So is the difference between that second and third round comp enough for me to outweigh the value that Chase's upside? Probably not,
No.
Probably not. So,
the last thing I'll add on this one is if they are not having a good year, middle of the year, and someone wants to offer a second or even a third, that's going to be at the top of the third versus the bottom of the third. Although I guess it'd probably be a winning team that's going for it. So there wouldn't be too high, but point is like middle of the year, if you're not good, go ahead and sell. Like at that point, be smart about it. You do the asset management play because he's not going to help you long-term at that point. But for right now, with a full season ahead, like people just want to throw away this season. Like, no, you only get so many of these. Like take the season, play it out, try to be good, and we'll see how that goes. All right, Nick, next one.
Muhammad asks, what would the outcome of the season have to be for Ron Rivera to be head coach next year? If we win due to offense, then the credit will go to EB. Will the head coach consideration and then leave? Or if we win because of great defense, then the credit goes to JDR because of the great talent on the defense. It's a no-win situation for Ron Rivera.
I don't think it's a no-win situation for Ron.
I agree with that.
I think if you win games, like head coach gets credit. Like ultimately that's what it comes down to. If you're winning games, the head coach is going to get credit, and it doesn't matter who. Like you're right, Muhammad, was that the question? Yeah. If the offense is good, EB's gone. Bye. Yeah, that's what he's.
So hold on, I'm gonna put the brakes on that for a second. Eric Bieniemy is interviewed for how many head coaching jobs,
bro? But I mean, I'm saying if he goes from Kansas City, and there was all the hold up, and there was all this stuff saying, hey, like hey, he's got Patrick Mahomes, he's got Travis Kelce, he's behind Andy Reid, and he comes here with this offense, with the inexperience of this group, with the offensive line, and they're like a top 12 offense in the NFL. You better believe someone is going to give him a head coaching job. You better believe that. Like, there's no doubt in my mind that happens. Like this job, when you look at it on paper, amidst an ownership change, all this stuff, like he's going to get a head coaching job. Like, there's no way he doesn't.
Logan, I hear you.
There's
and
no
your
way.
Your logic is so sound. But Nick, I'm sorry. I'm going to cuss on this one. I'm going to pull a Logan here. He's been the offensive coordinator in 4 of the last 5 Super Bowls.
I get it, man. But now
he should have had a head coaching job already. Like, that's the whole point. Is like this dude has gotten screwed 7 ways from Sunday on head coaching jobs before. So I'm not going to automatically say he's going to get one. Your logic is so sound, but he's been the offensive coordinator in 4 of the last 5 Super Bowls and he doesn't have a head coaching job.
But there were all these like modifiers to it. He's like, he's the offensive coordinator, but Andy Reid calls plays. He's the offensive coordinator, but he's got the best quarterback in football. He's the offensive coordinator, but so there is no excuse. There's no excuse for another organization to be like he shouldn't be the head coach here. And if I'm listening to his press conferences, I'm following the season at all, and some of these GMs I'm sure are, some of these like advisory committees, like he's going to be in the top group there, because what he's done here already in the short time. Again, we got a long season ahead of us, but like, man, he deserves that opportunity. So your point is well taken. He should have probably had one a while ago, but
he's been this guy the whole time.
But what I'm saying is there are all these kind of other things where like, oh, like he's actually not calling plays. So how valuable is that? Or, hey, the interview wasn't great, so we're going to go with this other guy. Now it's like my resume is impeachable. Like I go wherever I go, quarterback agnostic. He is going to take, in this hypothetical scenario, a 5th round quarterback. Now say what you want about that. Sam, slipped in the draft, whatever. A 5th round quarterback in his 2nd year and become a top 12 offense. Get out of here, man. That is unbelievable, and then like on a team that was not that good last year.
I get it.
When I am owner of a team, I'm definitely hiring him, but we'll see what the league does. But
I would have hired him 4 years ago.
But I think he is out of here if they are a top 12 offense. Now he could be the head coach here, whatever that is. I don't know what that looks like.
Sure.
But and that's fine. If you're Ron, you love that because you got another year of your job. And for Ron to keep his job for next year, I think they probably got to win a playoff game, which is very reasonable if the offense and defense are cooking the way we think they could cook. Now it could go the other way, whatever. But I think that's important.
So just to be clear, you 100% should be right. I am just not going to like bet my life on it, considering how much this dude has been screwed over in the 12 interviews he's had for head coaching jobs over the years, because he's been this charismatic guy with nothing but success the entire time. So yes, all the caveats are now gone. And someone probably would be like, yeah, we should have done this. Someone who may be interviewing him for the 3rd time. I don't know. But I'm not 100%. Like, I'm not ready to bet my life on Eric Bieniemy getting a head coaching job because precedent says that he's going to get passed over because the league is stupid. But you're probably right. He probably would. And that leaves a question for new ownership, which is, do we move on from Rivera, graduate Ron to some senior front office role, and try to keep Bieniemy in-house? Which I do think is possible. And there's been rumblings, and I'm not reporting this. I am regurgitating other rumblings I've seen on the internet of like that actually both Jason Wright and Ron Rivera are like angling for senior football front office operator positions. Like there's all these kinds of rumors out there, and who knows what to believe and what not about who's going to be running this team moving forward, because Josh Harris most likely would bring in some from the outside, and it's not even that. But I do think if Ron sells Harris on a vision and is like, I know the first 4 years or the first 3 years were not what we wanted, but we had a lot of bad luck and we should have done some things that we're doing now sooner, but like we're on the right path. Please do not mess this up. That there is a possibility that he could become overseer of that plan and allow Bieniemy to take that lead role. So I think that is possible, where Ron, like there's a level of success where, and let's call it like a 9 to 10 win season where they make the playoffs, 9 to 11 even, where they make the playoffs and don't win one, where Harris sees enough to see that something good is happening, but maybe the correct step is to pull Ron off the sidelines, and there's a game or two where it's like, hey man, we have better timeout usage, or not a silly challenge and like we're gonna take you off the sidelines, but you seem to have the big picture thing down. I think that could be a possibility. They
Yeah.
win a playoff game, Ron's gonna have his choice of what he wants to do moving forward. Because remember, he's also in the fourth of a 5th-year contract.
Yeah.
But if they do win because of the defense, like I don't think it's just going to go all to JDR, the talent. Like at that point, Ron also is the guy who is kind of, hey, I loved Emmanuel Forbes and he had 7 interceptions this year, and Quan Martin was huge and like I loved him. Ron will get credit for that, and as he should. He's the head coach, even if he's delegating a lot. Like he hired the people that he's delegating to, and he deserves credit for that.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think if they win some games, like what'd you say, 9-11,
Yeah.
and they playoff game,
And especially
win.
if they get better as the year goes. Let's say they have a rough September and Howell throws a couple of picks in bad spots and they're close games, but like he just doesn't have the experience to close it out yet. And then they get better as the year goes. And it's like, okay, Howell found his groove. Second half of the year, he's really solid. Like we need to keep this going. I think that could be, a scenario where that happens as well. What I think is fascinating is like, is there a scenario where they blow it up, like just everybody gets blown out? And I think obviously if they have a very bad year, that's possible. And I also think it matters who Josh Harris hires because like I do think he will bring in some senior VP of whatever, and who's that person and what do they think of the current staff? Like that's another thing to consider.
No, I think that's a great point. No, 100%. Like I think we're pretty aligned there. It just like if they,
I don't underestimate the stupidity of the league.
Yeah, maybe. And I guess like to Muhammad's point, like even if EB does well, like Ron gets that credit for making the hire when no one else wanted to hire him. So it's like there's a lot of credit here for Ron if things go well. Like head coaches always get credit, and people say, oh, well, the reason they won was because of EB, but Ron was the guy that got them together. And I've been on teams like that where it's like, oh, it's the genius of the offensive coordinator or the defense is really carrying the team, but the head coach is kind of under the umbrella of managing the roster. So I think he'll be. I think if they do well, Ron does well, and if they do well, EB does well. If they do well, Jack does well. So everyone's pushing for a good season and a good outcome, I think.
The other coach that needs to have a really good year potentially is Tavita Pritchard, because if EB does get that head coaching job, Tavita is the next in line to be the OC. And if they want to keep this going in a long-term sustainability thing, making sure that this is one of Ron's big projects this year, right? Like I asked Ron 2 weeks ago, last week, whatever it was, about like, hey, what do you do now? Like, what's the thing that now that you've delegated all these things, like, how do you decide where you spend your time? And he said one of his high priorities is spending a lot of time with younger coaches and developing them. And so like one of the things that Ron actually really has to do this year is make sure that Tavita, and some of this is on EB too, obviously, but like Ron is the overseer of the franchise from the football perspective. He needs to make sure that Tavita is ready to be an OC in case they're awesome and EB leaves and gets a head coaching job, because Tavita would be the next in line. So that's something that we're never going to know unless someone asks about it in the middle of the year. And even at that point, Ron's probably going to deflect the question, but it is a massively important thing for kind of the long term of the franchise. And especially considering how much time have we even spent on this podcast the last couple of years saying, hey, like they don't have the next guy. There's no one on the offensive staff specifically that is a future OC, a future head coach. And now they got probably 2 in Bieniemy, who should have been one already. And obviously is the OC, and Tavita is someone who I think fits that mold, and a lot of people think has an incredibly bright future ahead of him.
Yeah, and I think that's a sign of a healthy organization and a healthy coaching staff and a healthy head coach and coaching philosophy. Because I mean, when you look at San Fran, you look at LA, they have lost copious amounts of coaches, but they just find a way to get young guys in, develop them, keep good coaches at senior positions, and just kind of restock and retool in house. And to me, that's not an accident. You've got an excellent hiring process, and you've got an excellent culture in the building. And I think about all the guys that have left Kyle's tree that have become really good coaches. Matt LaFleur, Sean, obviously, Mike McDaniel. And to me, it's not by accident that Kyle's got this really high standard that matriculates down to those guys, and he hires guys that have the same kind of obsession with football. And so I think if Ron can kind of cultivate that here, and you've got a really good head coach here, or a good offensive coordinator with EB, who kind of has that super high standard and is going to challenge his staff. And I think that's just going to be almost as important for Coach Pritchard. You know, like, what is the standard here? And I'm setting it as EB. You have to match me, or we're not on the same page. And I know they've worked together in the past, and so they have that relationship, so they get it. But I think that would be awesome if they could not only develop the talent on the field, but develop the coaching staff in-house and make sure that you can handle, you know, like, I think that's going to be a big question for Philly this year. I know this is a little off topic, but they lose all these coaches. Do they just restock and retool because they've done a good job of bringing them along, or do they struggle not having the coordinators in place? So that to me is going to be another big step. You know, if I'm an owner coming in talking to Ron, and he's like, this is our plan to develop talent and the product on the field, but also make sure that that's a sustainable thing.
So let me ask you this sidebar. I'm gonna ask a question real quick, and then we'll get back to the ones that Nick has in the bag, so to speak. Belichick's coaching tree has been largely a disaster when they've left New England and gone to other places. Bill O'Brien was pretty solid at Penn State, but you know, in the NFL,
solid
he was not very good.
Like, he was good in Houston for a couple of years too, right?
Yeah, he had a couple good years. He's been the best one
before he became the personnel guy. You know, like when he was just the head coach of football, he was good. And as he got more responsibility on the personnel side, it became harder, I think, for him.
But that's also the best that anyone has done. Like, Cornell has not been good. He's been a great DC in other places outside of Belichick, but he's not a good head coach. Charlie Weiss was terrible as a head coach at Kansas and at Notre Dame. Nevertheless, I don't even know if he got back into the NFL.
Yeah.
You know, McDaniel has struggled, like Josh McDaniels has struggled, on down the list. Like, there's just been everyone struggling to leave Belichick. Why is it that it hasn't worked for the Belichick guys, but someone like Kyle, it does? Or, if you want to go back to Mike.
Yeah, Mike, I think, is a good one. And I think Mike kind of is the genesis of that tree. And even the head coach that was in Houston, I forget his name now. He's out of the league now, but also very similar. Can't remember his name. Not important. Let's start with Mike. Mike, when I came into the league, I didn't understand how important this was. He was a guy that was very forward thinking in terms of how to treat players. He had a very high standard, but he was going to treat you like a professional. And he created an environment that was, I don't want to say fun, but it wasn't like, it didn't give you tremendous anxiety coming into work, right? And when I don't have tremendous anxiety, I play better, but also I'm going to invest a little bit more time. And then I think the guy that really innovated in this area was Pete Carroll. So Pete Carroll came in and said, we are going to have fun. We're going to play games. We're going to be hyper competitive. We're going to let people be who they are. And it created this culture of, like, I want to be in the building. I want to be around my teammates. I want to be around the film, and I want to get better for them. And so when his coaching tree kind of dispersed and Kyle intersected with Dan Quinn in Atlanta, Kyle, I remember when I talked to him in San Fran, he's like, I am going to do that. I want to make a hyper competitive environment and people want to come to work. And that, while keeping the football stuff, the P's and Q's that I think are important, make sure the staff is really dialed in. And I think when I went to San Fran, people enjoyed playing there, and the level of football was very high, and the standard was very, very clear, but it was a fair standard. And when I hear guys who have played for people who have, played for the disciples of Bill Belichick, is they are very old school in terms of their philosophy and approach to how to treat players. Like, I remember hearing in the first meeting, them making guys stand up in the meeting and be like, hey, what does it say above the cafeteria door? Like, I don't know, man. I got here like 12 hours ago. How the hell am I supposed to know that? And why do I want to waste mental stress and anxiety on things like that? And so they kind of took this old school, like, Parcellian approach, right, and saying, like, we are going to grind you to absolute dust and really kind of turn the screws to you in this hyper stressful environment that isn't that enjoyable to play in. And so that works when you have Tom Brady. That works when you have Bill Belichick, right? Because Tom Brady and them are forever linked at the hip in terms of their success in New England. But the second you lose that franchise quarterback and you're not winning games, you know what you get? Is you get a lot of really disgruntled football players who are going to talk a lot of shit about you. So to me, that's something that I think especially in today's NFL, where the recruiting environment in college, the recruiting environment in high school has changed so dramatically. Those guys are their own industry already. Like coming out of high school, guys have NIL deals. Like there's money involved. I don't need the coach the same way I needed it before. I think Kyle understands that at a high level, and his tree understands that at a high level. So they keep the football extremely quality and extremely high, but they also treat you in a respectful, professional manner that in a workplace that promotes fun. And I think that fun element and that enjoyment keeps people coming back. Unlike these other, Belichick, who's a more traditional coaching philosophy, it doesn't work the same way that it used to, quite frankly.
Yeah. I also think Belichick has a little bit more of that magic touch, that you hear stories every once in a while.
Yeah.
And I don't know that stuff might even be kept secret to an extent from some of his other coaches, and they leave and they don't realize it. And, then you see what happens. I think that obviously there's a generational thing that happens with like the Kyles and the Seans, the
Sure.
Kevins, et cetera, as
Kevin's
well.
a great example,
And I would say also the last guy that deserves to be mentioned in all this is Andy Reid. And Andy is a guy who's hilariously funny. Definitely is invested in having fun, but also is serious and when it needs to be. And so you look at his tree, the Doug Petersons, and you listen to Peterson talk about coaching and kind of the humanity he brings to it.
Sure.
And I think that trickles down to whether it's EB, whether it's Peterson, whether it's some of the other guys that have come out of that tree.
Yeah,
I
like
think
Mike Kafka, who's the OC, and like all those guys, right, are like it's a very prolific tree because they get really high football understanding, but they also are not like this used to be a very West Coast kind of approach, right? Where players coach is the term that's thrown around a lot. And I think that has a little bit of a misnomer to it, but I think that's what those guys are. They understand that while players are somewhat of a commodity, they're also people, and I need to treat you as a person. And this is a high stress, high performance environment, and we all get that, and we're all okay with that. But don't make it worse for me. Don't make me more stressed out. And I think that's something that I think that like Andy Reid, the Shanahans, everyone understands that.
Yeah. Now we were watching Ted Lasso last night, and if you, I don't know if you guys watch, but in one of the episodes, there's a press conference where Roy Kent, of all people, the character in the show, talks about how the players are also people, and now I just have that replaying in my head.
Yeah.
I would say we would insert a clip of that here, but I think that's probably going to be a copyright violation, so we'll just reference it and keep it moving. All right, Nick, final question. Let's go.
Final question from Ranger Teach. The most realistic outcome for the offensive line is what?
Oh, that okay. So I'm just going to be very honest. I'm going to be honest. This is like a, podcast of honesty. Of the things from minicamp, I think I might have told you this, Greg, that I have the most uncertainty about. The offensive line is heading that list. And it's not Sam Howell, which is, I think, a lot of people are going to surprise a lot of people. It's the offensive line.
I don't know. I feel like the offensive line was pretty far up there for most people. It was certainly was for me.
What I'm saying, but I think I think there hasn't been a lot done in minicamp and OTAs that allows you to kind of answer questions. They've been passing a lot, which I think is good. It eliminates like the the fine system, the heavy contacts, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And the offensive line involvement in team periods has been way down compared to traditional stuff. So how does Sam Cosmi fit at guard? He looks good. He moves good. That's who he was coming out. But how does he handle playing guard? It's different. The timing's different. The sets are different. How does that look? Gates has been great. He's been super consistent, but he's learning a new offense, and that is challenging. And I think there are times where you see a little bit of, oh, who's this, who's that? That's fine because that happens this year. Sadiq, Chris Paul, left guard is another one that's a huge question for me. And then Wiley, I like Wiley, but I have my reservations about him as a long-term answer there, right? And again, there was nothing done during OTAs or minicamp that says, oh, great, like look how good all these guys look. And I think that's something that, again, it's just tough. And so in terms of ceiling, I think it's important to understand that I think Eric Bieniemy is going to elevate this group tremendously. So like, even though the sum of the parts on paper might not look super high ceiling, I guess, I think they're going to be playing better than that. And I think they're going to abide by kind of this statistical approach that's saying on the offensive line, you don't need 5 winners. You just need the aggregate of the group to be average, right? You need a top 15 offensive line to run a successful offense, which is not what we had here last year. So can they get there? I think with play calling, I think with a sprinkle of that magic sauce, they get there. But I still have some reservations about the group just because we haven't seen anything. So in terms of saying what are they going to be definitively, I don't have a clear answer because we don't have a lot of information at the moment, and it's something that I am a little nervous about. But hopefully those questions get answered as we get into training camp.
Yeah, I'm whatever is notch above a little nervous is about it. Not like I'm not panicked. And that's Bieniemy adjacent. Like I trust him to put them in good situations. My question is when the game requires more of them, can they step up? And I would say the answer's no. So this is an offensive line that's going to need to help itself.
Say it again.
Like when the game requires more, right? When it's fourth quarter, you're down 10 points and you need to drop back more than you'd like. And this is also a question of how. This is a question. I mean, no offense is like, sweet. Yes, we are in a suboptimal situation.
This is exactly what we wanted.
Holmes might get excited about it. Like, I get to run around and make stuff happen. Cool. But like, this is an offensive line that's going to have to help itself. They're going to have to be really solid in the run game and keep games close and, be able to kind of be in their game plan. We talked with like Warren Sharp about this before the season last year, right? He does all of his projections, all of his work in the first half on first and second down. Why? Because that tells you what the game plan is. By the time you get into third downs, you're playing the sticks. By the time you get into the second half, you're playing the score, right? You're playing time and score. So it doesn't really tell him about who a team is when he's talking about making projections moving forward for the next year or for the next week or whatever. So in those situations, like it's basically like how long can you stay in that safety zone? How long can you stay in what you want to be in? And that's going to be in part on the offensive line to execute in the first place and, be able to move the chains on the ground, be able to execute the screen game, not give up sacks, not take penalties that put you behind the chains. So it's about doing the basics. Again, they don't have to be dominant. They don't have to move the line of scrimmage like crazy. They don't have to, make crazy blocks in space. Like just don't put yourself behind the 8-ball or in a more literal sense, behind the chains. And they can be all right. I think there's going to be a lot of weeks where that's the case. And then it's, comes down to the end. Do they win or lose? Do they make the plays? Can Howell make the throws? Can, whoever make the catches? That's the NFL. And there's realistically going to be some other weeks where it's not as good and they do that stuff and they're going to lose games. So I think that's probably the most likely, that's the question, right? Most realistic outcome for the offensive line is that 10 to 11 weeks on the season, they play pretty well. 6 or 7 weeks, they play kind of poorly. And that's how they're going to win somewhere between 9 and 11 games in my prognostication.
Yeah, and I also say, like, as much as we want to be, I'm a little uncertain. Like, it's very tightly correlated to A, the play caller, which I think we're both very confident in, and then B, the guy throwing the football. And when you look at the best offensive lines, it's not a coincidence that, Peyton Manning has the best pass protection rated offensive line over the course of his career, or Tom Brady, right? Those guys understand protection. They understand that the strain on that group. And you got a young guy in there who has got to grow up in that area. So does that put a little more pressure on them, or can Sam, with that quick release, kind of get the ball out? Those are questions that I think, again, could make that group look definitively better, look exceptional in some cases. And, because like as much as people want to say like running the ball is more complex for the offensive line, but it actually is it's easier in a way, like it's less stressful because like if the scheme is good, if your run scheme is good and the play caller understands how to elevate run game through play calling, you can create good movement off of kind of misdirection and do a whole bunch of different stuff. And you don't have to leverage those guys as much in that situation. Same thing with the pass game. So I do think the EB thing is going to be big. And it's just like, can they pass protect, when they got to have it? And there are a lot of groups in the league that can't do that anyway. So it's not like they would be, in an especially like unique position there. But like, those are the reservations I have. Can they be an average group? Can they be average? And I think that's what we're both saying. And as much as like I like the pieces they've assembled, I like Wiley, I like Cosme, I like Gates, I like Sadiq, I like Chris Paul, I like Leno. They got to come together and in this offense be get a bunch of C's, basically, is what we're asking. And I think
Yeah.
that'll win you a bunch of games, which is maybe counterintuitive, but average O-line play is the standard, and exceptional offensive line play, like the Phillies, Kansas City last year. I mean, okay, this is a little bit of a tangent, but when you look at San Francisco, for example, that group's not great across the board. Obviously, they have Trent Williams, but 2 guards are okay. The center's okay. McGlinchey was okay last year, but they're elevated by play calling. They're elevated by the quarterback getting the ball out of his hands quickly. And all of a sudden, that group looks like a top 5 group in the NFL. So, like, I think we have the play caller in place. It's just about what does Sam do? And then does the group gel in a way that lets them be better than the sum of their parts?
Yeah, specifically for this offense too, because we anticipated being so RPO heavy.
Yeah.
That's what EB likes. That's what Sam likes. It's what Sam ran in college. The RPO isn't that effective when the actual, like, the run option, no one believes it. Like, cool, you faked the handoff. That looked like an RPO style look. You're down 14 and there's 5 minutes left. You're not running it. So like that time and score piece is also so essential because it keeps their entire playbook open. And especially this year when they're going to be very RPO and play action based, that believability that they could run the ball at any time is critically important.
And also,
all right. Yeah, go ahead.
And the other thing, like, just because, like, and when you watch Kansas City, and I'm not saying this offense is going to be Kansas City's offense, but the use of the screens and the quick game, the RPO, those quick throws, again, alleviate a ton of pressure off the O-line and make it really challenging for the rushers. So they're even if they're not running like the Kyle Shanahan, like, under center, hard run action, everybody's stepping up to it. Even if they're not running that, there are other ways that EB can manage it. So I do think that, and again, when you watch Kansas City film, like, he does a good job. There's chip help all the time. There's motion, reverse jet sweep action that holds rushers a little bit. So there's a ton of stuff that he's familiar with, which again gives me confidence that it's going to be better. But in terms of what we've seen from the OTA minicamp period, just hasn't been a lot. That's not anybody's fault. That's just how they structured the period. So.
Right. We did, by the way, get a question from Neil. What's going on with Stromberg and Daniels? Lots of Quan and Forms intel, but radio silence on the other two. And it goes to that, what we just said. Like, we just don't have a lot of data on the offensive line at this point. So we will hopefully have a little bit more by the end of the week. We'll see what they do on Tuesday. It's specific to those guys too, right? Because I think some of the younger guys are going to get some more snaps in the practice on Tuesday. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the week. We'll kind of do some stock up, stock down, take stock, if you will, after the spring. And that's the plan for later in the week. Nick, thank you so much, sir, for your service, your work, your excellent contributions to this here podcast. Logan, we'll talk later in the week.
Yes.
And until then, wherever you are watching or listening right now, please subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, like this so that other people know that they should also watch it. That's how that works. It's a whole algorithm thing. And I'll see you on the radio in a couple hours. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do it.
Very, very smart.